Oh, what a cute picture up there on the corner, but I don't quite look like that anymore. I'm very excited. I'm going to go get some new headshots for the first time in a little while. My publicist is thrilled. He keeps calling me saying, Liz, listen, and we've been looking at the same pictures for the past 2 years. You got to do something. So I absolutely am. So I'm very excited to go over to see my friends at Photoplex Studios in Alpharetta, Georgia, and we're going to go shoot some more. Everybody, it is so wonderful to see you. I am really excited. I unfortunately was sick with COVID last week, but you know what? Nothing but a thing, just a couple of days of fever, little congestion, and we're getting on over it. So I'm really excited to be here with you this morning. If you happen to see the show, please share it, like it, subscribe on YouTube. I will be your best friend forever and ever. I would like to shout out to our sponsor this morning, Pure Lift. Would you like a little Pure Lift? I have some in my cup this morning, and I am drinking the multi-berry flavor. So Pure Lift is just this little stick that can pop into a pocket, into a purse, into a gym bag. You open it up, and it has some clean caffeine granules in there. They're very refreshing. They're not bitter. They actually source it from green coffee beans. Let's see. My information says it is a tall cup of coffee in one small stick. And you also get some vitamins with that. So it's from the unroasted green coffee beans is how they source their caffeine. They go under the header of clean caffeine. It has 0 calories, all natural, nothing artificial, easy to use, made in the United States. And they have 4 wonderful flavors: mixed berry, lemon lime, original, and orange. Original is tasteless. So maybe if you need a little extra boost to that cup of joe in the morning, make sure that your heart can take the extra caffeine because it's going to give you a kick in the pants, but you'll be going all day long. And what I love about Pure Lift, and with its clean sourcing, it doesn't crash you. So that's really nice. It's nice, smooth, uplifting caffeine for your day. All right, everybody. I am really excited to have a wonderful guy connected, and he is in the lobby right now awaiting our very, very informational, it's meat and potatoes kind of show this morning. So we're going to talk to Dr. Peter Scire. You may have heard of Dr. Peter Scire's name associated with Brain Balance Atlanta, or perhaps you've heard about his work within the world of neuroplasticity. Dr. Scire is here today to educate and inform all of us about the fantastic benefits of working with him within Scire's Integrative Health Center, which offers health management for a whole host of common ailments, such as ADHD, anxiety, depression, Alzheimer's, gut health, stroke, and more. Let's find out more this morning with Dr. Peter Scire. Good morning. How are you?
Doing great. Good morning. Great to be here.
So I just read some really interesting content, and I also did some digging about who you are and where your license has come from, your educational background. You are a licensed chiropractor. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. Now, in my world, I know nothing about chiropractors. I really don't. And the only thing that comes to mind would be spinal adjustments, skeletal health, something like that. But that's not the case, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain population of practitioners that's their element that they work in. But for me, when I got into chiropractic, I'd been in the chiropractic care the majority of my life. And that's really why I wanted to become a chiropractor, because I was an athlete in high school. But when I got to Life University here in Marietta, Georgia, I realized that there was actually subspecialties within the field of chiropractic, that I could go and get my 4-year doctorate and become a licensed doctor and do exactly what you said and deal with mostly musculoskeletal. But if I wanted to go and continue my education, I could do a 3-year postdoc in the field of, at the time it was called chiropractic neurology. Now it's actually called functional neurology. And so I did that. And it led me to a lot of different areas, a lot of great clinical mentors that I had over the years that were able to really influence the way I practice now. And so it led me to doing an area of working with children with developmental disorders, but the bigger part over the last, say, decade now is really working in the field of brain injury, concussion, neurodegeneration disorders. That's going to be a huge thing as we continue to see the aging population. We're already seeing the baby boomers that I think at one point I read where there's almost 10,000 baby boomers that are retiring per day. And that in the next couple of years, Alzheimer's could outpace our GDP. So that's a big part of my practice. So I'm working anywhere from dealing with patients that have acute traumatic brain injuries or concussions in motor vehicle accidents to people that have had chronic problems with their health, whether it's chronic fatigue or autoimmune disorders. So it's a fun thing. I never know what's going to happen in my practice from one moment to the next. So it keeps the practice really lively. So we have a lot of fun in the practice. So.
Now, up front, I would like to talk about how someone can contact you. And then at the end of the conversation, let's go over that again. But how could someone contact you? What would be an example of why they would contact you?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of times, people, first they can contact me through any of the social media platforms, through Instagram or Facebook, or even drpeterscire.com. But more than anything, now, like you said, because I've been doing this for a long time, and people here, especially in the Metro Atlanta area, they hear about me, and then so I just get random calls, and people go, "Hey, I heard from someone that you might be able to help me with my thyroid issues," or "I was looking for a functional medicine practitioner," or now, because the discipline of functional neurology has grown so much over the last 30 years, we have this really awesome organization called the International Association for Functional Neurology and Rehabilitation that I've been a part of. I was a founding member of the organization, past president, and this is an organization that's been going on for about 10 years now. We have a multidisciplinary conference every year where we get some of the best leaders in the world in academia that are dealing with brain-based relationships, but also clinicians. And so that's the way, where people mostly can find me. That's the page that they can go on and just drop me a simple contact. And most people just say, "Hey, can I reach out to you and set up a consultation?" I do a lot of these things where I do these case reviews, these very comprehensive case aspects, because one of the things that we find with most patients is that their primary chief complaint or their primary symptom at that moment has been something that's been going on for quite some time. Mm-hmm. And that there is all these very steps of this process that have happened that in some instances I might have been going on for decades. And now it's gotten to that point where it's a full-blown, quote unquote, diagnosable condition, mm-hmm. whether it's a thyroid condition, whether it's a pain syndrome, mm-hmm. Some other metabolic relationship, let's say like diabetes, but how long has that been going on, and why has it been going on? And my job, number one, as a practitioner, is to be an educator. I mean, I think that's the number one thing that I try to insist on my patients, is that whether you even decide to join my practice and see me, I do think that hour-long case review that I do with prospective patients, my onboarding process, is very enlightening for those people.
Do you happen to see a lot of people, such as myself, to be honest, as the mystery patient? So, we do what we think that we should do. We go to our GP. A lot of our insurances insist that you go to your general practitioner. And then if they deem that you need to go see a specialist, you go to the specialist, and on, and the testing and the blood work. And then they finally come back and say, "I don't know." You're what we call a mystery.
Yeah. And you're right. And the majority of the time, and what it is, it's probably the process of just healthcare in this country now. I mean, probably 30 years ago, you could probably have gone to your primary care provider and they would have been able to do a lot of great workups on you. But now we live in this big healthcare system that has gotten so many levels of bureaucracy to it that doesn't allow for a practitioner really to go and dig into a case. Like any type of case, any type of these mysterious cases that you're talking about, in my world, is these very complex cases. And I love it because I literally have a huge big whiteboard in one of my treatment rooms, and we whiteboard this stuff. And I think you've probably seen some of my little whiteboard drawings on my Instagram account, and people go like, "Wow, like that's me." And you're trying to connect the dots. You're trying to connect that. Number one, it's a complex web, and the job of, I think, for me and practitioners like myself that have been trained the way we've been trained to think is, where do we enter? And where do we start trying to make some changes in that patient's physiology, but letting them know that it's not going to be simply, hey, I'm going to give you this potion, I'm going to give you this pill, or I'm going to give you this supplement, and everything's going to magically disappear. No, we're going to have to make dietary changes. We're going to have to make lifestyle changes. I've had patients over the years that, you know what, guess what? Part of your major physiological stress is your job. And is it time for you maybe now to really realize that you just can't keep going that way with your job, and that it's causing all this? Or you get some of these athletes that, you know, are training and doing endurance types of Tough Mudders or going to Orange Theory, like, you know, 10 sessions a week when there's only 7 days in a week. And you're like going like, I mean, how do you expect your adrenals to hold up? How do you expect your physiology to heal? So that's the fun thing about it, is trying to get patients to understand that this is your complex web. And especially all our females, I think all you females know how complex you are. And so that's the fun thing, is saying, okay, like, you know, my headaches, you know, I'm having active headaches. Is that related to hormones? Is that related to my thyroid? Is that related to, so that making those interconnections for the patient is really important. So.
And how much does diet play a role in someone's optimized health?
I think it plays a huge role. I mean, I think it probably plays I would say probably the number one role relative to, especially taking something like diabetes, okay, or metabolic syndrome, where you have people that, you know, have constant problems with their blood sugar, that leads to them problems with their lipid profile, you know, their cholesterol level, their LDL level, the so-called bad cholesterol. And now all of a sudden you're eating an abundance of carbohydrates, okay, and you're just loading up your body on carbohydrates. And the downstreams effect of that, it's going to impact your sleep. It's going to impact your immune system. And then you start thinking about eating carbohydrates. Well, most carbohydrates are just loaded up with an abundance of sugar, and especially if you're eating processed, you know, very processed carbohydrates. And so now sugar and the abundance of sugar drives down our immune system. So now, let's say in the world that we've been living in for the last 2 years, where we have this really, you know, crazy different virus that we've never seen, that our body has never seen, and we have a delicate immune system that's not working well, okay? We have high glucose levels that are causing all types of problems to the gut, to the brain, to the endocrine system, the hormonal system. I mean, so that's one of the first things that we look at. We know there's such a huge relationship between understanding the aspect of grains and gluten and dairy and those proteins. You know, the grains and dairy that we all eat today are not what we were eating 40, 50 years ago, okay? And that is causing a lot of immunological problems to the body. And now we can develop a reaction to those types of proteins that are found in grains and dairy and corn and egg and soy. And once we create a reaction to those foods through our immune system, our immune system is so sophisticated that it now can target a certain part of our body tissue and attack that tissue, because the protein sequence on, let's say, gluten in your favorite bread or bagel has a certain protein sequence that looks very specific to your thyroid gland. And now all of a sudden your immune system makes a target to the gluten, can make a target towards your thyroid. And over time, you now develop autoimmunity to your thyroid, which is Hashimoto's. And 1 out of 11 women in the United States have autoimmune disorders.
Very interesting. So, you know, I've definitely noticed from my upbringing, we had a large family garden. We would make our own bread, not all the time, but a lot of those old world things we were still doing.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing, when somebody says, okay, I've got to eat better, so I'm going to go to the grocery store and go pick out my items, I am quite alarmed at this point of the preservatives, soy being one of them, that's added into everything, from a loaf of bread to anything that it shouldn't be in. How do we get away from those preservatives? Are there certain types of, there was the organic craze, and I'm noticing even in organic items, there's still preservatives that I find to be negative for our system. What can you suggest when somebody's really trying to get just the health out of the sustenance that we need?
Yeah, and so it's a very complex process, because when you get into food labeling, even when somebody goes, "Hey, I eat a gluten-free," well, unfortunately, with food labeling, they can get it under a certain level and then be able to call it gluten-free. Okay, and there's the same thing when it comes to pesticides and chemicals that are being used. So, number one, I think trying to find local farmers that you can support in your individual communities. I live in Mapleton here, just by Smyrna Vinings, and they have a really awesome part in the city where people can get a little plot of soil and then begin to grow their own food. And so, trying to support those local farmers that are doing it right, okay, that are trying to grow and source as much true organic fruits and vegetables as possible. The same thing that you get into all your poultry and your meat, manufacturers that you can source locally. But I do think some of the bigger chains, I do think like the Publix and Kroger, and what we've done over the years for our patients is that there's a lot of great books out there. There's so many books that can be found on Amazon, and that are written by really phenomenal practitioners that have done a good job. And there are a lot of companies out there that are doing good work in trying to create foods. And so, my job as a practitioner was to try to read through all that, and we came up with a little, simple manual that we can give to our clients and say, hey, here's number one, how do you go through your pantry and be able to eliminate all those chemicals and all those foods that you're going to potentially cross-react? Because, people immediately, when you say, well, I need to eat gluten-free, they're like, okay, I can cut out pasta, I can cut out my bread, I can cut out my bagel. But can you find the other little source that's of gluten that might be in something that you may be eating regularly that we don't know if it's just a little bit of gluten or a lot of bit of gluten that causes that cross-reactivity? We have a tremendous breakthrough in science over the last decade, where we have very sophisticated labs that allow us to really look at how patients are cross-reacting to different types of foods. We can measure their cross-reactivity, even dyes in foods, or even gums that are found in foods. So there's really, if a patient wants to go that far, we can get into the heavy science of lab testing, or we can just start saying, okay, here's some of the generalities that you need to do from a dietary standpoint to improve. And it works. I use it all the time, and I'm not the only practitioner that you'd interview that could say that. So.
And what about, and I want to bounce the allergy topic off of you. So, when I was growing up, it was very, very rare for children to have extreme allergies, like peanut allergies, and for moms and dads to be laid up in bed because, like, we were just mentioning gluten allergies. Why do you think it is that our delicate human systems have developed so many allergies to our current environment?
Sure. Well, one, we have to kind of define the idea that there is a thing called an allergy, and then there is also what we call a food sensitivity or delayed sensitivity, okay? And it has to do with the way our immune system activates. So not to get overly complicated relative to our immune system, but as I teach my patients, is that we basically have these immunoglobulins in our immune system, okay, and our little warriors. And I always say to my patients, think of it like our Navy, our Army, our Coast Guard, okay, and our Marines, and so we have these different branches of our immune system. And when we, like, for example, have like a peanut allergy, or we have an allergy to like a shellfish, where we get an anaphylactic, or if you remember the movie Hitch with Will Smith, when he goes into the and eats the fish and he blows up, they got to go running to the drugstore. But anyway, that is what we refer to as an IgE response, okay? And we have these immunoglobulins. Keep it simple. Think of the word GAME, GAME, okay? So E is going to give us the immediate food allergy, right? G, A, and M are going to give us the delayed hypersensitivities to different types of foods. So the bigger question is that you asked was, why are we seeing such a increase? Well, probably a lot of it has to do with the fact that, for example, like the way our peanuts are stored, okay, they're cross-reacting with a lot of other potential foods that can then cause now there's an abundance of an immune response. Are we thinking that there are certain things that are happening developmentally in the development of the brain that is affecting the way the immune system is basically learning how to prime itself against the environment? Are we doing things where we're too over clean? Okay, I mean, there's a whole part of immunology now called the innate immune hypothesis. That's the idea that have we gone so too far with the utilization of antibiotics, the utilization of all the cleaners in our home that have made our environment so sterile that we don't allow for our immune system to interact with the environment? Because the beauty of the immune system is the idea that it has these different layers. We have an innate immune response that is our immediate immune response, okay? And then we have an adaptive immune response. And the idea is that when we come in contact with a pathogen, then our innate immune system is designed to try to defeat it very quickly, can defeat the bacteria, can defeat the virus, the pathogen. And if it can't, then it calls in the big guys, the adaptive immune system, that come and try to help our T cells and our B cells. And again, as we've learned now with a lot of the 2 years of COVID, that a lot of people walking around, not only in the United States, but worldwide, don't have very good immune systems. And they don't have basically the parts of their immune system that allow for them to handle these things. So part of it's a processing problem in terms of how our foods have been processed and changed over the last 30 years. And now our immune system has to work harder to try to, the sensitivity to that is worse. But more than anything, it could be the fact that our immune systems in general are just not as exposed. I mean, back when we were younger, if we got sick, your mom and dad did what? Hey, let's get you around Johnny and get you sick. So that way your immune system can build up with, resilience, okay? But we don't necessarily have that resilience now for most of us.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I remember in the beginning of all the COVID talk, a couple of years ago, my parents are older, and they said, when we were kids, you just go expose yourself to it, and you would build up the necessary antigens naturally, and you would be immune to it. Everybody would just get it. And they thought that it was quite an interesting tactic for everybody to go and shelter, to stay away from it. Now, I do understand, I have loved ones that have passed away from COVID, and, I understand now that it has mutated so many different times. It's just not the same strength it was in the beginning. We didn't know what it was, this, that, and the other. Oh my goodness, I have so many different questions. What is your opinion on immunosuppressors?
Well, and that's a big topic, because you get in, especially when you get into like patients that I see on a regular basis in my office, where we, again, if we're dealing with like chronic pain patients, and we get into patients that are on NSAIDs, okay, a lot of patients that are on a variety of different NSAIDs, whether they're over-the-counter NSAIDs or more prescribed medications. And so there's quite a bit of medications that are out there that suppress the immune response, okay? And one of the easiest ways to really look at how well the immune system might be working day to day. Two things that we like to run in our office a lot. We run a white blood cell differential on all our patients. Very inexpensive, very easy to do. Just get a little blood, and we can look at the white blood cells and look. And when we say differential, there's 5 different white blood cells that we can look at, and any primary care provider can do that. Okay, and so for instance, when your white blood cells are low and they're lab low, and let's say you've seen it on a trend, a patient might be more in a chronic type of immune response, okay, where they're constantly getting bombarded by some type of pathogen. Okay, now we haven't determined that pathogen yet. Now we can look at white blood cell differentials and we can see maybe what potential are they dealing with, a bacterial or viral response. But one of the other things that we like to do in our office is we like to run vitamin D. Because it's not really fair to call vitamin D a vitamin. It's actually really a hormone, okay? And I can tell you that the majority of patients that I've ever run, and I've been in practice now, almost 17 years now, and over 12 years of that, I've been running labs on patients, and vitamin D comes back very low. And that's not a good thing, okay? Because vitamin D is the conductor of the immune system. It's the big kahuna, okay? It's the one telling the different branches of the immune system, back to my analogy of our military, okay, that we have these different branches. And so vitamin D has a huge regulatory relationship on the branches of your immune system. And if we can't respond to a pathogen, and that pathogen could be food, because actually certain foods can be not so great for our body. Okay, we know that there are certain foods that have been studied that we may automatically make an immune response to, and our body's going to go say, hey, that's not going to be a good thing, and especially in a patient that might have chronicity of health issues. But when you have a low vitamin D, and then you have a low vitamin A, and one of the things that we can measure in the blood is this thing called glutathione. Glutathione is our super antioxidant. It's the most important antioxidant. And I think most people, because I always ask people these terms, have you ever heard of antioxidants? I'm like, yeah, like vitamin E or beta carotene. I said, well, those are antioxidants, but the big guy, the big dude is in the room is glutathione. Okay. And one of the things that we know now more than ever, and this has been studied through major universities around the world over the last 24 months of COVID, that 3 things they've noticed: low vitamin D, low glutathione, low vitamin A in patients when they've had major chronicity to the COVID or major reaction to the COVID response, okay? Because one of the things that is really important to understand about all physiological processes that we might be dealing with in terms of chronic issues is what is the level of our inflammation, okay? We want our inflammation to be very low on a regular basis, okay? We don't want our inflammation level to be very high. So think of it in a vertical line, okay? All right. So anytime our body comes in contact with any form of a pathogen, it's going to, within the first 7 days, going to cause an immune response. And this is how our immune system works. And when we have a low inflammation state, we get this little vertical rise, and then eventually we kind of come down. But if we're that patient that's sitting up here that has a high level of inflammation and we rise up, well, there is a ceiling up here that could get us into acute respiratory distress syndrome. So one of the things that we saw in a lot of patients, especially with the early part of COVID, with COVID alpha and COVID delta, was these patients that were sitting at high levels of inflammation. Well, what is that patient population? How about all our patients with chronic issues, diabetes, obesity, chronic pain syndromes, a whole host of things where their levels of inflammation was so high that they didn't have the ability to go from here to here and stay within the safe zone. They were already up here, and now they couldn't take on much more water. And that caused such, and so I don't know if you can remember, but about a year ago, or maybe even a little bit earlier than that, you kept hearing in the news about this idea of cytokine storming. And this idea, and it's well documented, and our immune system makes all these different immune regulators, and one of the terms are them called cytokines. Well, some of them are anti-inflammatory and some of them are pro-inflammatory. Well, when you start making a ton of pro-inflammatory cytokines, all kinds of things can break loose. So
interesting. Well, I have a question about inflammation, but I do have a question from a viewer. He's saying, what are some of the best ways to keep our vitamin D, A, and glutathione, is that right?
Glutathione,
okay, thank you. Up where it needs to be.
Well, one of the best ways, obviously, with vitamin D is getting out in the sun. Okay. I mean, that's one of the best things. So immediately in the winter, what do you think happens to most of us, and why do we get a lot of respiratory infections between October and March? Because the majority of us do what? We go indoors.
Indoors.
All right. So anytime you can get outside and anytime that you can get some skin exposure to the sun, and it doesn't have to be a long amount of time. Okay. Obviously, people that have I'm Latin, and so people that have more darker skin, we have to work a little bit harder to get our vitamin D levels. And it's very interesting. There's been a whole host of studies now looking at even with children with low vitamin D levels, and especially children that have darker skin, is their relationship to low vitamin D levels and the potential for developmental disorders. So there's been in the literature, there's been that. Vitamin A, we have to get from our diet, and we got to consume a lot of green leafy vegetables that have a lot of vitamin A in it. Okay, I always tell patients to try to think about how, back to a diet, try to get the rainbow in your diet. Okay, the rainbow of vegetables. Glutathione is manufactured by our liver. It comes from 3 main amino acid sources. So when we can get amino acids into our diet, especially amino acid called cysteine, it can help upregulate our glutathione. But sometimes we actually, because of our overall what we call oxidative stress, and I always tell patients, what is that? Well, think of it like a nail rusting outside. Okay, that we have oxygen, and unfortunately, oxygen makes free radicals. Okay. And it oxidizes our body. So we almost, in a simplicity world, kind of almost like rust from inside if we don't have glutathione, okay? And so when we have glutathione, and the top guy in the world on this is Jimmy Gutman. He's an MD. He's written a bunch of books on glutathione. You can find him on Facebook, Jimmy Gutman, Gutma. And he's the top guy. And really, if patients understood how important glutathione is to their day-to-day regimen, because we all need it. But the first thing I would say to people is get it measured. So the next time they go in for their routine blood work at their practitioner's office, I would always say, hey, tell them you want your vitamin D level measured. Tell them you would like to have your glutathione level measured. There is normatives for that. Because glutathione is a major player in overall super antioxidants, but glutathione is part of maintaining your barrier system in your gut. Glutathione maintains your barrier system in your respiratory centers system. Okay, so now all of a sudden you have a gut barrier system that is breaking down. You have a respiratory system that's breaking down. Where did we find out that COVID loved to live? Why have we all been going for testing through our nose? Okay. All right. So our nasal pharynx into the rest of our respiratory system. Okay. So when you have low glutathione levels, your respiratory barrier system breaks down. Your glutathione levels low will cause a lot with your gut barrier breaking down. And where were we finding glutathione early, especially in the alpha forms of it? We were finding it in the gut. Okay. And that's why there's even talk, for a while there about using stool testing to find COVID. Okay. So it's really important. And then glutathione has a lot to do with brain. There's other mechanisms there, but I would definitely say that without a doubt, people should always go into their wellness checkups and say, okay, hey, I want to know what vitamin D level is. I want to know what my glutathione status is. One of the other things to really look at inflammation and be able to measure inflammation is this thing called high sensitivity C-reactive protein, or HSCRP. Okay. Now, some of these labs just don't get run routinely because, unfortunately, we live in the bureaucracy of insurance, and insurance carriers don't want to pay a lot. Okay, for blood workup, and especially any of these specialty labs. But even if you went to labcorp.com, which is the largest lab company in the country, and you typed in total glutathione, you could see the code on LabCorp's website. You could see the code for vitamin D. So I'm not talking about anything that's not regularly available. It's just whether or not it's getting run on a routine checkup. Okay. High CRP is an association to inflammation. Okay. If your A1C is elevated, that's a relationship to potentially inflammation. Uric acid is a relationship potential to inflammation. So there's a lot of good labs that we can run. And so a lot of times, even when patients come into me before I even seen them and I'm doing this case review, I say, hey, when was the last time you had some labs work? Oh, I just saw my primary care provider, a couple of weeks ago. All right, send me over your labs. And sometimes I'm always astonished that they didn't run a lot. And then sometimes I catch a lab that, hey, okay, that lab was run, glad it was run. But here's what we can do with it now. Because if your vitamin D is low, man, you're going to be in a lot of problems.
Very interesting. I have another viewer, Michael, is asking, will vitamins work?
Well, I do believe vitamins do work. Okay. Now the question is the sourcing of the vitamin. Not all vitamin companies are the same. Unfortunately, the downside of trying to buy some vitamins maybe on the bigger like Amazon, or even go into some of your like Walmarts of the world or your Walgreens of the world, you're probably not getting the best types of vitamins in terms of sources. Okay. So one thing you never want to do is you never want to be cheap on your vitamins. Okay. There are other companies that have been able to figure out that there is a bioavailability relationship there, meaning that, let's say you go and you went to wherever store and you got your vitamin, and let's say it was vitamin D, for instance, and it says, hey, I'm going to give you 1,000 IUs on this capsule. The problem with that is, are you getting only about 30% or 40% bioavailability? So that means if you're taking 1,000 international units, you might be only getting 300 international units. But if I'm telling you I need you to have a therapeutic dosage of 5,000 or 10,000 IUs, you may only be getting half of that dosage. And then that patient goes, well, why am I not getting any better? Well, is the quality of the supplement you're using, the bioavailability? And there are certain vitamins and even botanicals that we have to work very hard to try to process in our gut and get through some of the acidity of the gut. So there are certain compounds that we know need support compounds to be able to increase the bioavailability. For example, a very common product that is used as a natural anti-inflammatory to reduce inflammation is turmeric. Okay, a lot of people hear about curcuminoids or curcumin. Well, in order to get curcumin into the blood system and be bioavailable, you need black pepper, but you need a certain type of black pepper. So if your supplement says turmeric or curcuminoids on it, and you turn it around and it doesn't have any black pepper in it, probably not going to be a good bioavailability. Okay.
Interesting.
So there are certain companies that, and this, I work with, companies that, you can only get them through practitioner levels. There are some good companies that are directly to the consumer that have done a better job at, number one, sourcing. Unfortunately, Sourcing is a big thing because you can get some contamination. You can get some very impurity in some of this. So that definitely, from a clinical standpoint, and especially when you're trying to deal with a patient in a chronicity state, you got to make sure you're getting very pure, compounds, and then knowing what therapeutic levels that you may need. I mean, someone goes, "Oh, hey, I've been taking, like, let's say I've been taking fish oil." I get a lot of patients that come in and say, "Hey, I'm taking fish oil. I heard that I should take fish oil." Again, if you're taking, like, let's say 1,000 milligrams of fish oil, which is generally the norm for most companies. Number one, there are certain types of fish oils. Okay, you have EPA, you have DHA, and some of them, one of them works more systemically in the body. EPA, DHA is more for brain. Okay, so in a brain-based patient, like someone that's dealing with, like, let's say anxiety or depression or some type of brain fog or working memory, I'm going to load them up on DHA, but at what dosage levels that are therapeutic? Okay. EPA has more of an anti-inflammatory mechanism. So it's great to use for pain syndromes. Okay. But again, at what dosage level, and specifically for that individuality of that patient. Okay. And then when it gets a little bit more complicated, people can have different genetic, basically, not necessarily mutations, but genetic sensitivities to where they may not do as well absorbing certain compounds. And even with medicine, we now know that the whole idea of side effects in certain medications might become to how the medications are cross-reacting with somebody's genes. Okay, and there's ways to test that. So when we get into patients that may not be responding to certain types of supplementation or certain types of levels of supplementation, we'll then get into genomic testing to see whether or not they actually have a gene that's not working as well, that could be causing them to have some biochemistry issues. So it gets a little complicated, but I don't want patients to go away and say, "Hey, all vitamins are the same." No, they're not all the same. They are totally different. Okay. I would not advise somebody with a chronic health issue to probably go to Walgreens or Walmart and buy their vitamins.
Well, and
those stores, but
that brings my next thought to light. When I was pregnant, especially the last couple of children, I was prescribed a prenatal vitamin. I loved that prenatal vitamin because I actually felt like I was getting what I needed. My skin was great. My hair was great. My joints didn't ache as much. I felt like I felt it. Now, of course, they don't really want to continue to prescribe that once you are no longer nursing a baby, you're no longer pregnant. And I begged, and I got about 5 years out of it until my OBGYN said, "No, I really can't prescribe this for you." What is the difference, as you were just mentioning, over-the-counter vitamins and prescription vitamins? Is there really that big of a difference between the two?
In that instance, no, I don't think so. I think obviously the pharmaceutical market is trying to get into the nutraceutical market. Okay, I don't know if there's a difference in that, because I do think there are really great companies out there. I work with a couple fantastic companies that are physician based, that you have to be a physician to be able to then have patients get access to them. But there are a couple companies that are that can be bought online, direct to consumer, that that they're very clean. Now, with supplementation, there are a lot of companies that go the extra mile and have certification process on their manufacturing of it, and you can go directly to their websites. So I do, hope that listeners will go to whatever source of supplement company they're getting their products from, and read up on that and find out, and dig a little bit deeper and find out where their sourcing is coming from. Is this company a company that's pioneering some of the delivery systems? We now can do things like, for example, most of my delivery of vitamin D is done in a liquid form that's emulsified and meaning that we attach the fat to it and it increases the bioavailability. So my patients know that when I give them 5,000 IUs of vitamin D in a liquid format that tastes like a custard, they're getting 98% of what's on that label at that moment. Okay. So there are certain companies that have just done a great job with the technology over the last 5 to 10 years to learn how can we increase the bioabsorption. Okay. So like, for example, like glutathione probably in the early 90s was made famous by a very particular major writer now, David Perlmutter. He's written a lot of great books out there and award-winning books. And the way we used to do glutathione in the 90s was mostly intravenous. Okay, and then we started realizing that we could do it a little bit orally, but better with topicals. But now we figured out, hey, we can go back to an oral if we emulsify it, make it in a liquid format, attach another type of acetyl product to it, it increases the bioavailability. So getting it into the gastrointestine, getting it through the gastrointestine is a lot of the problem. But then also we're realizing that a lot of patients that are dealing with chronic issues actually have chronic gut problems. So part of their problem with trying to even a great supplement company with a great bioavailability is the fact that their gut is trashed. It's inflamed. They have a leaky gut, meaning that now their gut lining is broken down so much that everything is getting through, causing an immune response. They have what we call gut dysbiosis, where they have an increase of bad bacteria in their gut versus good bacteria. They have an inflamed gut. Okay, we can stick a probe down there and go in there and see, but we could also take some, I always tell them, hey, we want to do the poop test today. We're going to take some poop and find out whether or not you have an inflamed gut. So there are non-invasive ways to find out, is your gut inflamed? But I can tell you this, if you're bloating, if your belly seems to get a little bit distended after you eat some starch or fiber, that's not a good sign. Okay, you should never bloat. Okay, so if you are bloating after eating food, you got some problems, and it might very well be this thing called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where certain groups of bacteria have migrated up from the large intestine into the small intestine and now causing problems. And especially if we're eating starch or fiber or some sugary based foods. Okay, we should never bloat. Okay, if you're having a problem with chronic constipation, or you may even going from chronic constipation to diarrhea, that's a good sign that you have major gastrointestinal issues and potentially SIBO, because when we have SIBO, we start to make methane and hydrogen, and then it can cause this relationship where we bounce back and forth between constipation and diarrhea. Constipation has been associated with a lot of thyroid problems. Okay, so there's a whole host of things. So when you get a patient that has a chronically inflamed gut, okay, now you're having to work even extra harder with their supplementation plan, because their absorption efficiency goes down. So a lot of times patients now in the age of, like we're having this great talk this morning and a lot of great information at their fingertips, and they get online and they do these health summits, or they listen to a podcast, or they listen to an interview like us. What I found in my years of doing these case histories is the patient is more educated than ever. Okay, as a clinician, if you're not on your game, if you're not staying in reading and going to conferences, I mean, the information is so crazy that a patient could almost walk in and know more about that particular ailment than the practitioner. Okay, so as a practitioner, you better stay on your A game. You better be doing a ton of continuing ed, reading research papers, reading books, because the consumer is coming in more educated. They've even had some labs that I may have run in my own practice that they've come into. My job is to sometimes say, you know what, you're doing some good things, but you may not be hitting the therapeutic dosage level that you need to be hitting. And that's why it may not be getting the effect that you were hoping to get. Okay. Or, you're doing the dietary plan, but you're not, I always say getting religious with it. Okay. You're doing it, but you're kind of doing it on convenience, and you're not necessarily doing it the whole way. Okay.
Right. So I have a close family relative that unfortunately has been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and she is not interested in chemotherapy, radiation, which she may or may not be a candidate for through her oncology doctors. She wants to juice. She wants to use what the earth can give us through our fruits and vegetables, and to try to assist her system in fighting off the cancer through juicing. In your opinion, is that practical? And how much of our fruits and vegetables would we need to consume if we wanted to get our vitamins that way instead of the typical oils and tablets?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would, even under the best scenarios of organic living and everything, I'm not sure. Again, back to the idea, can you get to therapeutic levels? Okay. So right off the bat, I do work with, some patients that have gone through cancer treatments and then come out on the other side and want to optimize their health even better. Okay. And there are great ways where, for example, in my practice, we can run a micronutrient test. Okay. We literally can draw some blood and know exactly what your levels of vitamin D, your B vitamins, your other trace minerals in that, through white blood cell analysis and red blood cell analysis. And then usually oftentimes we do this micronutrient test, and then we'll follow it up by actually running what we call oats testing, organic acid testing. Oats testing has been around for 30 some odd years. Two of the biggest companies in that arena are based here in Atlanta. And so oats testing, organic acid testing, allows to look at urinary organic acids that are byproducts of different biochemistry reactions, and we can measure people's antioxidant levels. We can measure them, this thing called methylation. Methylation is part of your liver. Methylation pathways need B vitamins. So we can go the extra mile, and we can say, okay, hey, we're going to run a micronutrient evaluation through blood. We're going to go an organic acid test through urine. If I suspect you have problems in your gastrointestinal system, probably going to get some poop and run a stool test, right? That allows me to look at your intestinal immune response, your pathogens in your gut. Okay. And so that helps us there. And then in relative to cancer, the big thing you want to find out is how well is your immune system working? Okay. And there's certain ways we can measure that in blood. We can measure your natural killer cells. You need to know what your natural killer cell level is, because if you don't have natural killer cells, what happens in the big concept of let's just say cancer in general, cancer is just abnormal cells that are not going through abnormal cell death. Okay. We have a very specific, with all our cells in our body, we have a very specific timeline of when they should eventually go through cell death. Okay. And when we don't go through this very specific cell death process, we have these malignant cells. Okay. But under normal circumstances, when we have a very good, robust immune system, our immune system will cause those cells to go through its normal cell cycle, or we will scavenge them up and eat them. Okay. But unfortunately, guess what happens? When we're not doing things to take care of our immune system, and then things get all crazy. And then so anytime I'm dealing with patients that are undergoing active chemo treatments or even post chemo or cancer treatments, that's my approach. Okay. For me, I try to practice in the world of evidence-based healthcare, where I'm going to run a lab on you, and I'm probably not going to guess on how I'm going to manage you. I'm going to, every now and then patients say, well, I may not be able to afford this lab or that lab. Okay, I'll do my best that I can, but I always tell them that, I'm kind of flying a little bit blind, but I do have all these years of clinical experience. But the reality is it'd be much better if I had some labs, and we had very specific labs on you, because we could measure that. And so when you can measure, then go in, try to adjust the very specific dosages that you need to raise up the levels, then you retest. That's evidence-based.
Very good. All right. So through our conversation, you have mentioned a couple of different books. I'd like to take a moment now for you to suggest the best reads. When a long time ago, I loved Deepak Chopra's series of books on well-being and health and diet. I love The Green Pharmacy. Are there books that you love that you would like to recommend to our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, one of the books that I love is that I give to my patients in my own practice is from one of my clinical mentors, Datis Karazian. It's Why My Brain Doesn't Work. Okay, and it's a thick book, but it's packed with so much information, because it really gets into the understanding of all these different mechanisms that are happening potentially to my brain that are going to affect all these downstream issues. Okay. And so that's a great book. I think any book by William Davis. William Davis is a really phenomenal. He wrote the book called Wheat Belly. Okay. He has another book coming out, I think, next month, called Super Gut. He's someone. David Perlmutter, who I've mentioned. David Perlmutter has written some phenomenal books out there. So, I mean, those are some of the guys that are writing books that end up on the New York Times list. But I think that the one book that I always start out with for my patients is the Why My Brain Isn't Working, because if we can start the conversation around brain, and we can really get into all the ways that brain not working well is going to affect all downstream issues. And then these systems, like your immune system and your cardiovascular system and your gastrointestinal system and your endocrine system and your hormone, they're bidirectional. So they're talking back to the brain. And this really came out of the field of psychoneuroimmunology or psychoneuroimmunology endocrinology, a field that started emerging. It's a mouthful, but it started emerging about 35 years ago, and really understand of, again, brain and mind. Okay, and understanding the idea that like, for example, now the literature is less likely to say that depression is just a neurochemistry imbalance. Okay, that it's just, hey, I'm depressed and I need some serotonin support. Okay, I need some Prozac or Paxil. Okay, that is not the model anymore. The model now that has really gained a lot of momentum is the idea is depression more of an inflammatory storm. Okay, is it an inflammatory condition that's happening, what we call neuroinflammation in the brain? Okay, when we have a concussion or a traumatic brain injury, we will definitely have this thing called neuroinflammation in our brain. What is that? Well, our brain, we most of us will recognize that our brain is these neurons, these nerve cells that we have. But we always knew that we had these things called immune cells, and called microglia. And microglia are these different types of immune cells we have. Now we know that our immune cells outnumber our neurons in a big number, okay, a huge number. And because of that, our immune cells can go from a healthy state where they're stable to an inflammatory state. So we literally can have trauma to the brain where we have a physical blow to the brain, and we cause a physical injury to the soft tissue of the brain. But then we can cause a chemical cascade, a neuroinflammatory cascade in the brain. And what does that do in real world? Well, let's say the electrical signal from one neuron to the next. You're neuron A, I'm neuron B, and the electrical speed's 100 miles an hour on a simplistic level, but let's say it's 100 miles an hour. But now, all of a sudden, I have a chemical neuroinflammatory storm, a chemical concussion. I may slow down that electrical transmission speed to 50 miles an hour. What does that look like in the real world? Oh, I just found my keys in my refrigerator because I didn't remember where I put them. Okay. Or this idea of brain fog. Okay. This idea of patients come in and go, I'm just not thinking clear anymore. I can't sit down. I can't do my work at the level I do. I notice there's changes in my handwriting. I'm forgetful more than ever. So that is a major player. But a concussion or a traumatic brain injury isn't the only way you can create neuroinflammation in the brain. If all you do is carbohydrate load all day long and eat pro-inflammatory foods, guess what you're going to do? You're going to drive neuroinflammation of your brain. Okay. If you have a whole abundance of psychological stress in your life, guess what you're going to do? Drive neuroinflammation in your brain. You have gut dysbiosis where you have increased bad critters in your gut. They're going to produce certain cytokines that are going to travel up from your gut to your brain. There is a connection that goes there and cause neuroinflammation. And we know this to be true because in developmental disorders, there's this term called PANS or PANDAS, where it's neurological psychiatric disorder brought on by various types of infectious agents. For example, we thought it was strep at one point. Now we know it can be a variety of things. Okay. So there's a variety of ways that we can increase neuroinflammation. And one of the things that we're really beginning to find out and understand more than ever is the idea of mycotoxins, molds. So back to the question about peanuts. One of the things about peanuts is the amount of mold that's on peanuts from storage.
Wow. That's mind-blowing just to think of it that way.
So there's all these things that could potentially be driving neuroinflammation, okay, that now is leading to all these brain-based problems. And we see it developmentally in developmental disorders, especially in the autism community. Okay, it's been well documented that they have a neuroinflamed brain, changing the architecture of their brain, the way the brain is actually making connections. But you can actually develop inflammation of the brain. And I challenge anybody to say, okay, well, that's not true. I'm like, all right, well, do nothing but carbohydrate load for several days and eat the worst food possible and ask me how your gastrointestinal system is working and your brain's working 72 hours later.
It won't.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh my goodness. So if I wanted to sign up today and to get started with you today, do I need to go to Marietta, Georgia? I mean, what does it look like to begin the process of becoming a patient of yours?
The easiest way to do is just, go back to, my website and just send me a contact information. And then I literally actually just send you a personalized email. I like to try to be a personalized practitioner. So you're not going to get an automated thing. I'm actually going to send you a personalized email and send you probably 9 out of 10 times to say, hey, here's my phone number, text me, call me, and let's get you scheduled for a case review. And where I have all these questionnaires that I have very specific questionnaires that patients will fill out, and then they will send me back. And sometimes I'll come home from work and at my doorstep will be just these packets of thick envelopes, and I'll spend good hours so reading it. And because I don't think patients are used to their practitioners being that thorough. I don't think they're used to going in the world of traditional healthcare now, where practitioners have literally a few minutes to see a patient and make clinical judgments. I think it's always refreshing for my patient population to come in and know that even before they walk into my practice, if they're in the Metro Atlanta area, I've spent a lot of time already looking at their case and reading their reports, or the type of questions that I ask on my history intake are very thorough. And if you got to take several pages to write out your history, there isn't something that is trivial to me. I want it all because it's a web. It's a complex web. All this just didn't start in a vacuum. There's a whole host of reasons why you arrived at my doorstep. And now my job is to try to figure out where to enter in and start getting because patients, when you deal with chronic patients and patients that have had issues for a long time, number one, because of their chronicity, their brain's not working well. Okay, so a lot of these patients are depressed. A lot of these patients or have anxiety issues. A lot of patients have been told that you just have to live with it, or there's nothing you can do with it. So there's a whole host of a psychological element there. So most instances, patients are very skeptical. They're unsure whether or not are you going to be like anybody else and really, tell me you can't help me. So to establish that trust rapport and to say, listen, I do think I have the gusto to be able to get in there. Yeah. And so, oftentimes I find myself having about a 2-week or maybe a 30-day window to get some patients some results, because if not, especially their spouse or their family may say, why are you going to this guy? Like, what, oftentimes it's like, oh, he's not a medical practitioner, but then they're like, well, no, he's getting me some results. And so once patients start seeing some results, then they're more likely to go, okay, what else can you do for me? How far can you go? Because at this point in my career, my practice is actually mostly referral. I mean, I really don't have a big, social media platform, because most of it comes from referrals. And I've worked with numerous amounts of people in their whole entire family. Eventually, mom comes in, and I end up working with grandma and grandpa, because they're worried about their brain as they age, or auntie over here who's got chronic diabetes. What can you do for me? And so that's fun, because you've done something right if people are now referring their loved ones to you.
Absolutely. We have a viewer, Michael, which you had answered one of his questions earlier. What a great show. I wish all doctors were as well educated as Peter. Full of so much information. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Fire away if you have any more questions.
Yes, absolutely. You can go to www.drscire.com. That's drscire.com. So before we end the show, I know that you walk the walk and you talk the talk. Can you give me maybe the top 3 or the top 5 things that you do personally for your optimal health?
Yeah. Well, number one, I would definitely say the most important thing to do is get a good night's sleep.
Okay.
And people would say, that's pretty easy, right? It's not. If you ask most people, how much sleep do they get? They're not getting mostly 8 hours of sleep and good continuous sleep. Okay. So how can I help that? Well, one of the pieces of advice I would always tell patients is that get this, your iPad, your Netflix account, your Hulu account, whatever, under control. Mm-hmm. Okay, because if you're somebody who needs that at night to try to decompress, the light that's coming off those smartphones and tablets are going to activate a part of your brain that's going to affect your arousal centers. Mm-hmm. And keep your arousal centers going, firing. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to be able to shut down those arousal centers very efficiently. Okay. And we found now that sleep is a very important way that our body basically goes through a cleanup phase. Recently, in the last decade, we now found out that the brain has its own lymphatic system, and called the glymphatic system. And the glymphatic system in the brain, its job is to clean up basically metabolic debris in our brain as we sleep. Mm-hmm. And if we don't do that, we don't do a good job of cleaning up our brain. So it's almost kind of like your desktop. When you have so much stuff opened up on your desktop and you don't turn it all off, mm-hmm. it doesn't all the files don't get compressed again. So that's number one, first thing. And one of the big things with a lot of patients when they come into the office is the first question is, how are you sleeping tonight? Well, Dr. Pete, at 2:00 in the morning. And then I can't go back to sleep, especially women. Majority of the women. Majority of women I've ever gone out with tell me that all the time. It's just like, I can't sleep, right? And I'm like, okay, well, guess what? Sleep and the ability to stay asleep has a lot to do with your blood sugar.
Mm.
So the next thing on the equation is your stable blood sugar. And especially in women, because women tend to not eat very well and they go long distances without eating.
Mm-hmm.
And now they fall into this thing, what we call reactive hypoglycemia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so when we sleep at night, we have this thing called cortisol. And cortisol gets released at a certain time response relative to our circadian rhythm. And we can have an abnormal blood sugar relationship at night where, because especially when we're under chronic stress and when we have a acute stress, we make cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important. It's a very important physiological response. When we have chronic stress, over time, we cannot maintain the relationship of our cortisol level. So cortisol goes down. And that's not a good thing, because cortisol is needed for us at night to break down stored tissue called glycogen and raise our blood sugar at night. So to maintain our healthy blood sugar. So what happens in that analogy of staring at the ceiling is I didn't use cortisol at that moment. I used epinephrine and norepinephrine. So it's like those little needles just went into your heart and go poof, and you're up, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the most important things you got to start doing is start stabilizing your blood sugar, because usually you're coming out, you're getting this low blood sugar that goes down, and now it's got to pump epinephrine, norepinephrine, because you're under such chronic stress that your cortisol level can't be made by your adrenals. So now you got to default to the catecholamine system. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so you now get that window between 2 and 4. Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing. So I would say your sleep habit, mm-hmm, to really optimize and get your immune system going. There's a great book. You asked about it in the book. It's called Why We Sleep. Mm-hmm. Written by one of the leading sleep experts. And he gets into the whole chapter on sleep and the immune system. Okay. So one of the first things I was telling people, again, when they were coming in, like, what are some of the precautionary things we can do to help our immune system with COVID? Okay. Yeah, I could tell you, okay, here are the immune things, but number one thing, sleep. Mm-hmm. Number one thing is blood sugar. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because if I can start maintaining a good blood sugar level and really start getting those carbohydrates out of my diet, yeah, and eating more protein and especially good healthy fats, mm-hmm, and maybe starting to move towards maybe quote unquote more ketogenic relationships where I'm getting an abundance of good fats. What are the good fats? The avocados of the world, the coconuts, your MCTs, your medium chain triglycerides, all that kind of good stuff to get good fats in your diet. Then get your clean protein that's not been loaded up with antibiotics and loaded up with hormones. Mm-hmm. And then get into your good fiber-based vegetables that you can load up on. And then if you're going to eat fruits, your low glycemic fruits, okay, all your berries of the world, okay. Mm-hmm. And so, believe it or not, before we even begin to start doing labs on patients or putting them on supplementation, we really start right there. Because blood sugar is going to have a relationship to adrenals. Blood sugar is going to have a relationship to the thyroid. Blood sugar is going to have a relationship to the gut. So two simple things that people can begin to start looking at is measuring their how they're sleeping, okay? And then from there, getting your ability to darken where you sleep, okay? A lot of people... I have blackout shades in my room because I want my room as dark as possible. Because the darker my room is, the more likely am I to make melatonin.
Interesting.
And I'm not a big advocate of people taking what we call exogenous melatonin, meaning taking it externally, okay? Mm-hmm. We need it therapeutically, okay? And we know there's a relationship of melatonin and COVID. There's been a lot of really cool research on utilizing, a couple milligrams of melatonin to help, as melatonin has immune properties, okay? But one of the easiest ways to really improve your melatonin relationship is the darker you sleep. Okay. And so even if you have a little TV in your room, number one, I would suggest get the TV out of your room. Okay. If you do have your TV, and you may even have to put tape over your little power. Okay. Because even that little speck. Okay. But if you do this at night and this is how you're trying to go to sleep, forget about it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's really important. Okay. Because now you get that time for the body to begin to clean itself up. Then you increase your melatonin. Okay. Then the other thing is that if you start getting towards really where you're eating less carbohydrates, less sugar, and going more towards healthy fats, well, your brain is made up of fats.
Mm-hmm.
So back to, can I get fats in my diet? Well, sure. Okay. If I'm eating clean and I'm eating the avocados and the coconut, one quick thing, you never want to cook with extra virgin olive oil. Okay. You can take it, but you
Are
don't
you
want to cook
serious?
with it because it's got a high flash burn. Okay. Or a low flash burn, meaning that it'll become very free radicals when you cook with it. So if you're going to cook with oils, cook with avocado oil, cook with coconut oil. It's got a higher flash burn. Okay, you can take olive oil and you can put it on your salad and everything, but extra virgin olive oil, you generally don't want to cook with it. Okay.
Wow. Never knew that. Well, thank you so much. I never knew that. I cook with the EVOO all the time.
Yeah. Check low blood sugar levels at home. Yeah, I just tell people to get a blood sugar monitor. Okay, and start measuring their blood sugar. And again, where should it be? Definitely under 100. Stay somewhere between 80 and 100. Okay, I try to get people maybe when they get really good with managing their blood sugar down to the mid 80s. But I'll tell you, with women, it's this epidemic of low blood sugar, and low blood sugar is a big problem that's going to be involved with a lot of hosts of issues. Okay. And so that's one thing with women I'm always looking at, I'm always concerned with, because women will get up. And then here's the other thing, kind of to sit there and go, if I need caffeine in the morning to get my engine going, then you're probably in more of a low blood sugar level. Okay. And then I'm going to crave salt and because I need to get my blood sugar up. So that's something that, we see a lot of times. So those two simple things right there. And then, I would say the next thing after that would obviously be exercise. Okay. Now you don't have to be, someone who is doing CrossFit or Orange Theory like crazy. But one of the best ways to kind of just get some basic exercises is trying to do some interval training, where maybe if you just, basically try to get your heart rate up in 30 seconds, run in place for as long as you can for 30 seconds, and then rest for 60 and 90 seconds, and then do it again, and create yourself this little 10-minute or 20 or 15-minute template where, you're doing jumping jacks, or you do as many push-ups as you can. Because the one thing, the downside to, some people that can get a little bit crazy, and I experienced this my own self with doing Orange Theory, where one time I went an enormous amount of times in consecutive days, is that very high level of endurance training can now produce a pro-inflammatory state.
Wow.
And I think we talked about all the downsides of inflammation. And that's why when people were going, why are some of these people that are healthy dying from COVID? Well, I'd always say, okay, well, let me find out if they just did an endurance, event or something, or they go and they CrossFit and some of my buds at Orange Theory go twice a day, and I'm like, oh, what are you, out of your mind, And so you get to that point where now something like you would think like exercise, and it actually, there's a term in science called hormesis. It's a bell curve where a certain amount, like for example, let's say red wine. Red wine has some really good, antioxidants in it, but at maybe 1 or 2 glasses of red wine, that's okay, and you get the health benefits of red wine. Sure. But after that 3rd or 4th glass or that bottle, there's a lot more downsides. So there's this thing called hormesis, and where certain biological effect gets us into the negative side of it, and exercise would be an example of that. That you could over-exercise, overtrain, and now create a tremendous amount of inflammation on your body. Okay, yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I had never heard of that before, and I am absolutely a candidate. Not as of recently. Right now, we had talked about a couple of conditions that I'm trying to find my way through. But yeah, easily, 2-3 hours in the gym happily every day, 7 days a week. Very interesting. I grew up watching and being impressed as a small child in the 80s by all of these aerobics women, that they would aerobicize like all day long.
Yeah.
And we would think, oh, that's health.
Yeah. And for the patients that aren't ready for interval training, obviously back to some of the simplicity of it is that for those who sometimes say, I don't have the ability to right now maybe spend a bunch of money on supplementation. What can I do immediately? Go to an anti-inflammatory diet. Okay. Get as religious as possible with the anti-inflammatory diet, so that way I can get pain under control. I can get inflammation under control. So therefore, even me trying to take a little just casual stroll in my neighborhood isn't painful. Mm-hmm. So some of the suggestions obviously relative to the state of pain. So if a patient is on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10 or above on a pain scale, obviously I'm not going to suggest interval training. What we're going to do is we're going to start trying to get the inflammation under control as fast as possible. Sure. And then start getting them to a level of, okay, what can you start doing? Can you just go for a small walk around your neighborhood? Or even, can you, some patients, because of their inflammatory states, they can't even go up the staircase to their second floor of their house. So there's certain elements here where you just have to, but the number one thing is we got to get the inflammation under control. And if we can start getting inflammation under control, because we're getting sicker as a society, and that's everybody knows that. I think for in the healthcare system that, and this is another reason why during COVID our hospitals were so overburdened, is that even ask any medical professional before COVID, we're sicker than we've ever been as a country. Okay. Yeah. And so I think the idea that we got to recognize how much sugar we're getting in our diet, how much processed foods we're getting in our diet every day. We haven't even gotten to touch on the idea of what we call chemical overload, all the chemicals that are affecting us, and they're called EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals. So we have this whole unregulated chemical world that we're living in, from the chemicals that are on our bed sheets, in our clothing, all the flame retardants that are on everything in our homes, okay, our carpets, the biphenyls, all that is causing a whole host of chronic conditions. Mm-hmm. So we're fighting wars on multiple fronts, but most people don't even know that their body are fighting wars on multiple fronts. And if we don't have the immune resilience, mm-hmm. if we don't have our military strong enough, we can't fight. I always tell patients that, think of it like Europe. We're fighting multiple war fronts in World War II. And I have to then pick which war front is the one that I have to go to first, mm-hmm. to get that under control before I can go here, here, and here. Okay.
I love that analogy because, through this conversation, there are so many things that are brought to light, and it can almost seem overwhelming until you mention the fact that we have to have our military strong. We have to know which battles to fight, when to fight them, and be healthy and strong enough to fight them, because the things like flame retardants and the chemicals in our society, in our world, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So we can only do a certain amount to get it outside of our households, but we're still coming in contact with them. We still have to go out into the world where they're used, and they're used widely. Yeah. I think it's a wonderful thing that you just mentioned to sort of calm the psyche of saying, no, it is overwhelming, but it can be managed.
Yeah, and it can, and we can make a big impact in getting patients to, and I think that that's why the patients that can go and get the individualized labs, and we can sit down and do the labs, they can finally get a true window into their physiology. And we don't do all the labs, every one of them right up front. Sometimes we pick which ones we do. We try to customize that to the patient's needs and their wallet. You know, we don't want to overblow somebody's wallet and say, okay, hey, we're going to run thousands of dollars of labs and right up front. No, well, we'll do the necessary. And I work with a lot of patients that are on fixed incomes as well, and we choose which labs to run. And so, but I'll tell you the one thing about the chemical thing that's really important. And you and I both have kids, and I think at some point we probably would like to have grandchildren. But the bigger thing that we're worried about right now is the rise of infertility. Yeah. It is going through the roof. And one of the major reasons why we believe that is the amount of chemicals that are in our environment that are disrupting the way our potential conception can actually happen. So preconceptive health in this country has to be on the forefront of this generation of children. I know it's something that I've worked very hard with, educating my children on simply not using deodorants that have aluminum in it. Okay, not having, especially women. Okay, I'm this whole thing with women, and I used to always laugh when I'd be dating somebody and I'd go into their bathroom and I'd see their whole counter filled with so many products that had so many chemicals in them. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I'm sitting there going, okay, now I know why you're on that medication or why you're having this health issue or whatnot, because you've been being bombarded by all these chemicals in your personal hygiene products or your beauty products and everything. So I'm really big on that. And especially a woman that is potentially trying to get pregnant. Okay. And there are lab ways that we can literally measure the chemical assault on someone, and to measure the levels of potential chemicals that might be found in their body, as well as the immunological reaction of the immune system to the potential for chemicals. And so understanding that people have to detox, and then getting people to understand that, hey, I need to be more aware of the cleaners I'm using and not to have these cleaners or not. I mean, I always tell people at Orange Theory, I'm like, hey man, I may have some extra body odor because I don't use a underarm with aluminum or anything or parabens in it. Okay, I just don't. I mean, I go to Sprouts or Whole Foods and I buy the paraben-free, deodorants or hair soap and conditioners and everything like that. So that's really important because we're potentially headed, and there's a recent book that really came out about this, and some of the top guys in the world are talking about infertility rates in this country. And then we're also seeing a increase in genetic disorders. We're seeing 10 years ago when my practice was predominantly focused on children, autism was the big thing. Okay. Now autism is one of so many, because now we're seeing all these really complex genetic disorders. And how did that happen? Okay. And more children that are being born with all these developmental delays. And so, and for me, it's coming back to probably the assault on both mom and dad. And I'm seeing it in some of my own family members in my life that are close to me, trying to have children, and they're having a hard time right now. And so back to patient education and back to getting people to understand that, okay, these are things. And we could have a whole nother show about EDCs, but it's a big problem. Okay. So
I would love to have you on again and do a show just on, so, you would like to conceive a baby. Let's talk to Dr. Scire and figure out what you need to change and what you need to do. I think that's a wonderful point. I have Michael, who is a viewer. He has a question, and this is a throwback to a few moments ago when we were talking about vitamins. He's a grandfather. He's saying that his grandkids are back in school. He keeps hearing about other schoolmates coming down with COVID. What are some multivitamins that he could send to his grandchildren to help boost their immune system for, resisting COVID or just not having a very severe case of it?
Yeah, well, I have a 16-year-old daughter and I have a college-age son, and what do I load my own children up with? I actually simply get them vitamin D and vitamin A. Okay, vitamin D, we talked about that. For depending on the age of children, there's certain dosages that we may want to have. If they're younger than 10, we might be able to get by with just 2,000 IUs a day of vitamin D. As they get older and they get towards the upper adolescence or older, you want to go higher to maybe 5,000 IUs, 10,000 IUs a day. Vitamin A, probably somewhere of maybe 15 to 20,000 international units. For those out there, IUs, when you hear that number 15,000 or 20,000, remember IUs are a very small number. You have IUs, then you get into milligrams, and then you get into micrograms and milligrams, and so very small. It's a very small amount. And the idea that you're going to get vitamin A toxicity, no, because the type of vitamin A, if it's retinol, palmetto, it's not an alcohol-based vitamin A that would most people would be worried about a toxicity level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an ester-based level. So there are different forms of vitamin A. But the one that's retinol, palmetto, that you can take that, dosing it very high and not worry necessarily about a toxicity level. So those are two simple things. Relative to brain development in children, get them on your megas. Get them on, especially if they're under age of 10, if they're under the age of 5, load them up with tons of DHA. Okay? Get them used to eating avocados and coconuts. I mean, I used to slice of avocados to my daughter when she was so young and get them used to that, so that they eat those good fats. Okay. Same thing goes for kids, that, they shouldn't be drinking all these sugary drinks. Okay. Don't give kids Gatorade. Don't give kids smart waters with dyes in it. Okay. I mean, we could have a whole conversation about dyes. Okay. That's a whole nother thing. Okay. So, DHA will definitely build brain synapses, and if you want your child to have a really good brain to succeed, that's a big thing. Okay, so do that, but then also do the inventory, like I said, on their chemicals. Okay, their chemical exposure. Right, one of the downsides right now of the mania behind COVID, especially in the schools, is how toxic of all these cleaners that they're using to clean the classrooms every day. Okay, and all the wipes that they're using and all the hand sanitizers. I mean, I hope people are following the conversation about the FDA looking at all the chemicals that are being found in these hand sanitizers and everything that that could be potentially leading to major problems physiologically.
Absolutely. I have another viewer, Joe. He's asking, will COVID ever be over?
Yeah, I mean, I think the prevailing wisdom right now is that COVID is probably going to be another, well, number one, let's start out with the fact that we've always had coronaviruses, right? Coronaviruses have been there. Okay. So whether we think that, this is a gain of function thing that happened in a lab, or that this really truly happened from crossing a species, I don't know if we'll ever get to. I'd like to hope that we would think that we'll get the truth out of that, whether or not. But the reality of it is, I do think that we're going to continue to see various variants. Now, if what we're starting to see and continue to see with the evidence, there was some new research that came out that they found that people that had a prior exposure to the Delta variant actually got the natural immunity, actually fared better than the people that actually were vaccinated during the period of Delta. Now, we haven't dealt with Omicron yet. We haven't been able to look at that. But the idea that could we potentially develop more natural immunity over time. But here's the caveat to natural immunity. It's not going to be the same for every person, because that person that doesn't have a good vitamin D level, that person that doesn't have good glutathione levels, that person that doesn't have good vitamin A levels, the building blocks of the immune system, okay, the antioxidant cascade that they need, their natural immunity is probably not going to be as robust as somebody who's doing all that. So natural immunity, and I think that that's probably been one of the big scares with just saying pull the Band-Aid off and let's go completely natural immunity, okay? Because we do have a tremendous amount of people worldwide that are sick. And so their ability, and back to what I said about inflammation, okay? If you're down here and your immune response to COVID could probably just bump up, and you may have those mild symptoms. You may be asymptomatic. You may have those mild symptoms, and that cascade of your immune system fighting a pathogen over a 14-day, 21-day cycle just comes up and does its natural thing, okay? And then we move to now our memory of that infection, and we have what we call clonal expansion, meaning that our immune system comes in, it makes the antibody complex to the pathogen, and then we now, if you're a Star Wars freak, you have all the clones, okay, that come out there, and now we have memories of these clones, okay, and that's natural immunity, okay. That means that when I come back in contact with a pathogen that looks similar, my immune cells come in, and I can make a response to that. But that is all dependent on a very robust, resilient immune system. So if you're not checking your immune system on a regular basis, and the simple way to do that on just one blood level is that vitamin D. I mean, it gets a little bit more complicated but if you can get vitamin D, total glutathione levels measured, and then start measuring your inflammatory levels back to like high sensitivity CRP, even things like homocysteine levels, your blood sugar, your A1C, and versus your glucose level. Okay, always remember that it's important to make sure that you get your A1C measured. So I do think that it's probably going to be part of our respiratory virus grouping. Okay. And my hope is that with all this and all the people that are out there talking about this, and my colleagues and others that are doing great interviews like this, that the public is becoming more educated in the idea that, man, I gotta do things to protect my immune system. And if we can do that as a country, and we can do that worldwide, like if I was the president, I would have started sending everybody vitamin D, vitamin A, and glutathione packets, and mailed everybody in. I would have taken the stimulus package and said, "This is what we're doing."
I love it. Would you
start loading up people that way? Okay, because vitamin A, vitamin D is cheap. Okay, even if you're getting the best company out there, it's not that expensive for people to get.
Absolutely. Will you run in 2024?
No, I wouldn't take on that craziness. Okay, but the reality of it is, I wish we could get to the policymakers, because it's in the literature. Okay, that's the thing. That's for me and my colleagues, and we have these running discussions regularly. And I'm part of a lot of think tanks, and I've been part of a think tank for 2 years now, that we meet every Tuesday or Wednesday night, and multidisciplinary practitioners around the country and around the world. And we've been really analyzing all the COVID research out there, and it's astonishing what's not happening in. There's no there's no consensus right now on diagnostics, and no consensus is on the therapeutics. And 2+ years into this, that's a big problem when we haven't come to, and we have some brilliant minds that are looking at this, and we still haven't come to a consensus that how one ER hospital may approach the diagnostics of a COVID patient is different than another. And I know that to be true because I'm on these think tanks where I'm working with medical physicians that are in hospitals, that are in the ER right away. We're on the front lines from day one, and they're still on the front lines to then working with patients in different states that have told me, okay, this is how I was diagnosed with COVID, and or in the hospital, or even by the primary care. So we have a problem in the consensus of diagnostic services, and then obviously definitely on the therapeutic side of it. But the bigger thing is, what can we do as a country to start, because it's my belief that this is we're in for more of these viruses.
Mm-hmm.
And whether they're going to be gain of function viruses that we're playing around with labs, or we're dealing with viruses. And one of the most profound books I ever read in my life was a book that I read in my early 90s as I was leaving my undergrad work and going into my graduate school, was The Coming Plague by Laurie Garrett. Okay, Laurie Garrett is an award-winning journalist. Okay, she's written many books. But that was one of the most profound books because it talked about what the future might look like. And that book was, I mean, it's now almost 30 years old.
Wow.
And she basically forecast this. Okay. So I do believe that if we don't, as a society worldwide, start realizing that we're going to have to start learning about immune resilience.
Mm-hmm.
That's been my message from the beginning. Even before COVID, people could go back to my post on Facebook and Instagram, and hey, and I would always tell my patients, like, from September through the winter, here's my immune protocols. Here's what we're doing to make sure that you're not coming down with just basic respiratory viruses. And so I think that needs to be more of a big topic that we have. And I know there's a lot of other people like me in the world of functional medicine and functional neurology talking about that and trying to educate patients and trying to get books written as fast as possible. But, finding the publishers that have the right now, because it's become so politicalized, have the gusto to publish a book is even hard too for certain instances, or, practitioners that are trying to get this information out, but big tech doesn't want it out there, even though it's coming from medical journals with a lot of credibility. Mm-hmm. So.
Very interesting. Well, I'd love to have you on again. There's a whole host of topics I feel like are there. They're bubbling at the surface, and we haven't approached them yet. But I do want to thank you for your time this morning. This has been more than I even expected. I knew, I remember telling you in the green room, do you have an hour for me? I think this is going to be lengthy, and we've been on for an hour and 42 minutes. Thank you so much for your time. You have really added a lot to this morning for so many viewers and to the show.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. And I'd love to come back. And if viewers have any type of, topics that they want to, post interview, chime in, feel free, because we can take it in a lot of directions. And, next time I can even, bring, particular research papers that I'm reading. And I love to do that for my patients. I love to share with them, the books I'm reading or the research I'm reading, because I don't want people to understand it's not just me. It's not my opinion. Most of the time, I've learned to be a great parrot of the practitioners that have trained me clinically in my graduate work, my postgraduate work. Every year I do just, for example, in order to maintain your chiropractic license in the state of Georgia, you got to do about 20 continuing ed hours a year just to maintain it. That's one weekend. I do on average about 300 hours of continuing ed, per year for my own just information, aspect. But then I also teach, and I'm about to teach with one of my clinical mentors in Dallas this year in the developmental arena, and that program is going to be 200 hours of clinical teaching. So it's fun when I get to research, stay on top of the current things that are happening in healthcare, get into active practice. There are a lot of people out there that don't go to practice every day and see patients, but I do physically see patients every day, every day in my practice, and do see people remotely. So I can work with people remotely, and I can work with people, they want to come down to Noonan and hang out with me and have some fun. So. Awesome.
Well, thank you so much. So everybody go to drscire.com. That's www.drscire.com and contact us, and it'll go straight to Dr. Scire, and he'll be able to start the communication with you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
Absolutely. Same to you, Elizabeth. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you. Now, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh my goodness. That was a wonderful show. Thank you so much for staying so engaged and bringing on some wonderful questions. Everybody have a great day, but stay tuned for the news, which is up next. We're going to go over our financial report from last week and going into the end of this month. Everybody, we are blessed. You are blessed.